Today on the DNVR Rockies podcast, we do a season review of the 2024 year for the Colorado Rockies. What went good, what went bad, and what went downright ugly. That's all coming up next on the DNVR Rockies podcast. You are tuned into the DNVR Rockies podcast brought to you by Bet365. Use code DNVR365 when you sign up. Choose your offer and find out why it is never ordinary at Bet365. What's up, everyone? Happy Wednesday, midday here on this beautiful Wednesday, early afternoon. And we've got a good show on hand today. I can't really say that it's going to be the most positive show of our season, but it is a good show that we have today because we're going to do kind of a report card of sorts of the Colorado Rockies 2024 season. We're going to look at what went good. There was a few things. There are things in there that went good. We're going to look at what went bad, a little bit more of those, and what was downright ugly. A lot of ugly to get into this year. But I do think it's important to take a moment sometimes to review the season, see what happened along those lines so that we can get an idea of where we need to make improvements, what adjustments need to be made as we get set for the coming years. And I do think this possibly could be a turning point for the Rockies based on the history that we've seen in years past. I'm going to explain that as we get going. But before we dive into that, I got to share with you guys some breaking news that just popped up. I saw this just before we jumped live here on the show. Bally Sports, and specifically their ownership group, Diamond Sports, just announced that it will no longer be carrying 11 of the 12 Major League Baseball teams that are under contract going into next year. The only team out of those 12 teams that will be getting a renewed contract as of right now is the Atlanta Braves. So 11 of the 12 teams that Bally Sports broadcasts will no longer be getting a contract renewed as of now going into next season. That includes the Reds, Tigers, Royals, Angels, Marlins, Cardinals, Rays, Guardians, Brewers, Twins, Rangers, and yeah, all but 4 of those teams are going to need to renegotiate new deals. There are a couple teams that their deals are expiring as this year concludes. So those teams were already going to have to renegotiate as it is. But basically, the reason this is happening is Diamond Sports, who owns Bally, is going bankrupt. They're in the middle of their bankruptcy, kind of reorganization right now. They're going through court filings, all of that kind of stuff. So they are having to kind of, bail out of some of these contracts that they had made before they went bankrupt. To kind of give you guys a little bit of context here into what this might look like. Basically, this doesn't mean that these teams aren't going to have a Bally Sports broadcast next year. It just means that they're now probably going to have to renegotiate some of those contracts. It's probably going to end up being more expensive for the fan, which is really important and really unfortunate for a lot of the fans in those markets, as their rates are probably going to have to go up as they want to watch their teams. We obviously know a lot about that here in Denver with the altitude Comcast dispute that's still ongoing. It's hard to watch Nuggets, Avs, Rapids games in Denver. And we did have a little bit of that last year with the AT&T Sportsnet contract. But some recent, news along those lines was that the NBA and NHL did find a new renegotiated contract with Bally Sports in August. Again, though, it made it more expensive for the fans. So basically what happened was anyone watching NBA or NHL through Bally Sports has to now pay more through Comcast to watch those games. So a lot of moving pieces, something to keep an eye on. I did on my Twitter account repost a ESPN article giving more information about this whole contract renegotiation for Bally Sports. So take a look at that there if you want more information. You can follow me on Twitter at CJJ Saez, or we can follow the DNVR Rockies on Twitter at DNVR_Rockies. Let's talk 2024 season, though, for the Rockies, because we got so much to talk about here. And I said it before this show started. This show is all about the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to save the good for the latter half of the show, though. And we're going to start with the bad to get that out of the way. No, not even that. We're going to start with the ugly to get that out of the way. The Rockies set a lot of records this season, and arguably most of them, if not all of them, were bad. They were ugly records. So let's get right into it. The Rockies, I'm going to kind of go down this list here, and we'll start with the offensive stuff, because I think it's easy to at least start, when you talk about the Rockies from an outsider's perspective, it's easy to look at that and say, most of that's pitching, right? The Rockies have always had this history of bad pitching, a bad bullpen. Like, that's been the biggest issue for years. I would make the argument coming into this show that for the first time in a long time, the Rockies' offense was actually worse than our pitching was. So let's get into it. Rockies had a team batting average of .242. That's the worst in franchise history. The Rockies struck out 1,617 times. That's also the worst in franchise history. They had a .704 OPS, worst in franchise history. They scored 698 runs. Again, worst in franchise history. I'm going to just put this umbrella out there right now. Assume that any of the stats that I'm about to give are worst in franchise history. I will tell you if they're not. The Rockies struck out 26.8% of the time this season. They also struck out 10 or more times against a starting pitcher, 17 games. Again, worst in franchise history. Their contact percentage was 72.5%. Their on-base percentage was .304. Again, all of those stats that I just listed off are worst in franchise history. And the reason I want to highlight those in a group is because, again, that's offensively for the Rockies. I think in the past years, especially when we started this reconstruction, or maybe leaning towards a reconstruction phase for the Rockies, I would argue probably 2020 on, where we started to realize that the Rockies needed to make some moves. It started to become clear that pitching was the biggest necessity for improvements over those franchise seasons. I think we haven't really paid a lot of attention to the hitting side of things, because you did have, a team where you had guys like Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, guys that could hit really well. Ryan McMahon early in his career. And so the offense was just never really, the issue. Maybe they weren't the best part of the team, but they weren't the issue. And now I'm starting to see a team where offense is creeping up to be one of the kind of most need to improve aspects of this team going into the offseason. And it's not to say that the pitching has been great by any means. We're going to talk about some of the pitching here in just a moment. But it goes to show that, the offense has to improve when you look at what needs to be changed in the offseason. So I think if there's one thing in particular that stands out to me as the biggest area that needs to be worked on for next season, it's got to be swing rate. It's got to be strikeouts. And Will Carpenter in the Twitter chat, he says it best. The offense is averaging 10 strikeouts per game. Good Lord is right. What are we doing? I said it. You struck out 10 or more times against the starting pitcher, 17 times this year. Let's not forget that the Rockies won a game against the Marlins, a god-awful Marlins team, a game in which you struck out 20 times, and you won that game, which is unheard of to me. That goes back to that year where they beat Chris Sale, what was it, in 2019 or something like that, where they also struck out 20 times against Chris Sale and then ended up winning that game. The Rockies are averaging double-digit strikeouts in their games, and that needs to be fixed. Now, the silver lining to that, which I will talk about when we get into some of the positives of this show, is that sometimes is going to come along with that young core of guys when you've got guys who are still in their first, second, maybe third year in the big leagues, and they've got great pop. This Rockies team is showing that they have some pretty good pop. Got 3 guys that are hitting, or 4 guys, I should say, that are hitting over 20 home runs. So there are some positive side effects to striking out that many times. But you guys are right. That is something that needs to be fixed and addressed moving into the offseason. You cannot win baseball games when you are striking out an average of 8+ strikeouts each game. Contact percentage, I mentioned it being up to 72.5 or down to 72.5%. Your on base percentage, worst in franchise history with a 304. You're averaging, over a quarter of your lineup struck out each game. That's just something that has to be changed. So I want to point that out. And now shifting into what I think a lot of people would normally expect to see from a negative standpoint, which is the pitching for the Rockies. The pitching, the team ERA averaged at 5.47, which is obviously bad. But to be completely honest, given the injuries to Senzatella, the injuries to German Marquez, I'm not overly surprised by 5.47 team ERA. That did get better in the second half of the season. Big thanks to Ryan Feltner for dropping that team ERA a couple points there late in the season. But that's something to keep an eye on. You also have to recognize, and I think this is almost more important to me than the pitching or the overall team ERA, the Rockies held a 7.44 ERA in the ninth inning, which was the highest ERA among MLB teams in the last 50 years in ninth inning games. So when it mattered most, when the Rockies said, we've got ourselves in a decent spot to win, their pitchers are averaging 7.5 runs scored in that ninth inning. They also finished coming into the second half of the season. They did drop that down to a 7.1 ERA in the ninth inning. But the next closest team with the worst ERA in the ninth inning was Toronto with a 5.8 ERA. The ninth inning has been disastrous for the Rockies. They also lost a franchise high. This stat I didn't have written down, although I did see it, where they lost a large handful of games when you were winning by 5 or more runs entering the ninth inning. I'll have to double check, that stat on Twitter and online because I did see that posted a couple times coming into the show. But the Rockies lost a good handful of games where they entered the game winning by 5 or more runs in the ninth inning. So those specific pitching stats need to be fixed. The second half of the year, though, has been better for the Rockies pitching. And I want to talk about that and highlight that later in the show because I think that's an important thing to think about when we're talking about this Rockies team and this pitching staff that I think for the first time in at least a handful of years has not been the worst spot of this season review. I talked about the offense being a little bit worse than their pitching staff. So something to keep in mind. Also, the last kind of ugly stat line that we saw was the Rockies' win percentage on the road. They finished their road series with a .296 winning percentage that ranks as the third lowest in franchise history. They went 24-57 on the road. Obviously, that's just terrible. Like, you got to fix that. So those are some things to keep an eye on as we look at what's to come in the coming years and how to review this last season. But I did want to share with you guys what Bud Black had to say about his response to this season and what he expects this next season to look like. Where is Bud Black hoping this offseason progresses? What does he think needs to be changed from a negative standpoint going into next season? This is what Bud had to say before the last game of the season about what needs to change going into this offseason.
It's a good question, right? And I'll try to put it in a nutshell. I think that the consistency. I'll start with the pitching. The consistency of pitching has to be there. I think you look at all teams that are successful. They have consistent pitching from day one till day 162, and our pitching was not that, especially early in the year. It's been too variable, and it didn't lead to enough stretches of good pitching that enabled us to win some games. The bullpen faltering, especially early in the year, was troublesome. So that has to improve. I think overall the starting pitching, didn't. We were hopeful, and we're sort of threading the needle that that German was going to come back, and Senza was going to come back, and Kyle going down for a couple months, And some of the guys that made starts for us, and you can look at it. It was we're in a difficult spot a little bit in our rotation. So solidifying a solid rotation with depth is something we have to do in the bullpen. Defensively, I think we're fine, right? With again, I don't know what roster changes we're going to make, but at the premium positions up the middle, I thought we were pretty good, right? Shortstop, second base, center field. Really good at the corner. So I don't think the defense is something that we're, unless our roster changes. We don't know. Offensively, we've talked about it ad nauseum, right? The strikeouts. We need better contact right now. Whether the roster changes and the names change, maybe it changes. But if a lot of the guys come back who are here, they meaning the guys who strike out a lot, we got to cut the strikeouts in a nutshell. We got to put the ball in play now. And you hope that some of these younger service time players, and if we have Doyle, Tovar, Tolia, Goodwin, down the line of Auburn Beck, we got. I was looking at their service time, right? The Dodgers, right? Even their backup players that came in, Taylor, look at the service time. They got service time. We don't, with the exception of Chuck, and you can say Mac has some service time, but on balance of the 14 guys, and it takes time. So we need that to happen. We need that timeline to happen quickly.
So that was Bud Black talking about what he needs to have shifted going into this next year. And this next year, well, if history aligns, this next year could be a huge one for the Rockies. And I will explain what I mean in just a moment, because history has shown that this next season might be a pretty big one. Let's take a quick break, though, before I get into that, and give a shout out to one of our sponsors. That is Coors Light. Coors Light is the best place to get light beer, and it is the most cold and refreshing light beer. And look, I'm a little sad because summer is over and there's no more Rockies games at Coors Field, my favorite personal place to enjoy Coors Light, because they've got really cheap Coors Light there at Rockies games, and the vibes are great. Like, Coors Light and Rockies baseball just go hand in hand. But look, just because the Rocky season is over, it doesn't mean that you don't have to drink Coors Light anymore. There are still incredible ways to enjoy a cold, refreshing Coors Light. You can go camping, you can go hiking with some buddies, you can even just enjoy it on the porch with some friends. Wrapping up a nice weekend here. It's Wednesday, so you got a couple days till the weekend. But it doesn't matter what time of the week it is. There is never a bad time to enjoy a nice, cold, refreshing Coors Light beer. So make the most out of your times you choose to chill. Choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instant Cart by going to CoorsLight.com/DNVR. Please celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, based in our backyard right here in Golden, Colorado. Also, it's an incredible time to be a sports betting fan, and there is no better way to get into the sports betting world than with our friends over at Bet365, because at Bet365, we don't do ordinary. And I have been pushing this hard this past couple weeks, and I'm going to continue with this because with Bet365, they've got this really cool offer called the MLB Early Payout Offer. It's only valid for a couple more weeks because we've only got a couple more weeks left of the Major League Baseball season. It's the postseason. It's a great time to be a baseball sports betting fan. And with the MLB Early Payout Offer, if your team goes up by 5 runs or more, you get an instant payout parlay, same game parlay selections, all going to be marked as winners. So use code DNVR365 when you sign up. You can deposit $10. You can choose between either a bet and get offer or a first bet safety net offer. We've got some incredible boosts on the DNVR or on the Bet365 app with your DNVR365 code. So be sure to use that code DNVR365 when you sign up and see why it's never ordinary with Bet365. Must be 21 or older and physically located in Colorado. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right. I got to share something here because this was an interesting little note that I saw coming up in the recent days where I've been doing some deep dives into the history and the stats and how some of these stat lines line up in recent years. And we're a superstitious bunch here on the DNVR Rockies podcast. I would argue baseball in general is a superstition-based sport. So if we're going to lean into this superstitions and this history that's lined up with some trends over the recent years, I wanted to highlight this recent trend that I thought was interesting. The Rockies have now had, after this last season, 6 consecutive losing seasons. For the third time in franchise history, the Rockies have had 6 consecutive losing seasons. That window went from 2001 to 2006. They had 6 consecutive losing seasons then. 2011 to 2016. And 2019 now to 2024. But the thing that stood out to me is if you look at the year after those 6 consecutive losing season windows, the Rockies went to the postseason the very next year. They obviously went to the World Series in 2007. They went to the postseason in 2017 and 2018 after that 6-season losing streak. And now we have just wrapped up our third franchise 6 consecutive losing seasons here in 2024. So based on the recent trends, that would then lead me to believe that the Rockies should be going to the playoffs next year. Now, obviously, that's all speculation. Obviously, we're just throwing things out there. We're saying maybe it's the turning of the tides, the gravity from the moon. I don't know what you want to say it is. It's got to be something, though. And, maybe this reminds me of the Giants winning a World Series on only even years from 2010 to 2014. But whatever it is, it has stayed true 2 times in our Rockies franchise history, and hopefully will be a 3rd time next year. So if history is set to repeat itself, I got to go back to my old middle school teacher, Miss Miyake, who taught me a lot about history and how to study history in whether it be U.S. history, world history, whatever it is. We're going to look at baseball history, Rockies history in particular. You want to study the specific trends that happened throughout those times. So let's go back and look at our 2007 lineup when the Rockies, after losing 6 seasons in a row, they go into 2007 in a playoff and World Series team in that next year. Let's look at their 2007 lineup. They had Willie Taveras, Kazuo Matsui, Matt Holliday, Todd Helton, Garrett Atkins, Brad Hopp, Troy Tulowitzki, Yorvit Torrealba, and our good buddy Ryan Spilborghs. That was their 2007 lineup. That's a pretty solid lineup, right? And the thing that shows up for me is they had a lot of young guys on that team as well coming into that year, and Todd Helton being kind of obviously the biggest spark to get them to the World Series. It was destiny, as many would say, for Rockies fans. But then let's jump ahead a few years, and 6 losing seasons later, between 2011 to 2016. The Rockies go to the postseason in 2017 and 2018. Well, what was their 2018 NLDS lineup? It was Charlie Blackmon, DJ LeMahieu, Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, Matt Holliday, Carlos Gonzalez, Ian Desmond, Tony Wolters, and German Marquez rounding things out as the pitcher. Now, I would make the argument that to me was arguably the best Rockies lineup that I've seen in my recent years as a Rockies fan. That was actually my first time living in Colorado getting to watch the Rockies. And again, you look at who are going to be the guys that helped bring that team to the success that they had. It was some young talent. It was guys like a young Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, Charlie Blackmon. You had a couple veterans, Matt Holliday, Carlos Gonzalez kind of entering into his prime as well, German Marquez getting things rolling on his end. But that was another really solid lineup for the Rockies. So now, how does that compare to just a pretty generic 2025 projected lineup? And now, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here on what this 2025 projected lineup is. We're going to spend plenty more shows talking about the specifics of a deeper dive into what this 2025 projected lineup could look like. For this, I just went based off of generic guesses of who I think we could see in this 2025 lineup. Starting off, you've got Ezekiel Tovar, Brenton Doyle, Ryan McMahon, Michael Tolia, Nolan Jones, Brendan Rodgers, Jordan Beck, Hunter Goodman, Jacob Stallings, and Kyle Freeland. What stands out to me about this potential 2025 starting lineup is, let's assume all of these guys have a great offseason, they're healthy going into the next year, and they hit their stride at their peak. Because I would make the argument all of these guys could still have peak performance seasons left in their tank. There is no one on that roster that's like, I think they've kind of peaked and they're on the downhill slope. Like, all of these guys could still have yet to hit their peak in their career. If you get a peak season out of all of those guys, the top 5 hitters in your lineup are all potential all-stars, could be potential all-stars if they play at the peak that we've seen them play in their time with the Rockies so far. Ezequiel Tovar, easily an all-star next year if he continues to have the success that he's had in this entire season, but especially the second half. Brenton Doyle, same thing. Second half of this season, best half of a season he's played baseball-wise all year long. Ryan McMahon fell off in the second half, but he was your lone all-star this year, so we know he's a stud. He's probably another Gold Glove candidate there at third base. He's another incredible player for the Rockies. Michael Toglia, a possible Gold Glover next year. Also a guy who went from just simply a power hitter in the early parts of the season to a guy who could ramp up his average a little bit, get his on-base percentage up there. He had a hit streak going for a long time. He made some big adjustments in the second part of the year, and also we know he can hit 500-foot home runs. Nolan Jones had a really tough year. He's going to be one of the big question marks for us going into next year. But if you go back to Nolan Jones when he played his rookie season, the type of player that he was, he's another guy that could, if he is in full Nolan Jones rookie season swing, could be another all-star for this team. I think this team could compete if everyone is healthy and playing at their best with the 2018 NLDS lineup and maybe even the 2007 World Series lineup for the Rockies. Now, again, a lot of unknowns there that need to be sorted out during this offseason. A lot of variables that need to take place. And I do think this is going to be a very active offseason for the Rockies. But I think, given the recent trends in Major League Baseball for the Rockies in their history, this could be a surprise year for them. Now, I'm not going to go on record and say that they're going to go to the postseason, and we're going to talk about what our goals need to be and what a successful season looks like next year later in this podcast. But I do think that if this talent and if this lineup stays healthy, the Rockies could be a competitive team next year. We'll go as far as to say that. Let's transition into some positives here for just a moment, because it wasn't all bad for the Rockies. And before we get into our next break, I got to give you a little preview of what we're going to be talking about. The Rockies had 4 players on their team this year that had 20-plus home runs. And that was the first time that that's happened since 2019. Brenton Doyle, Ryan McMahon, Michael Toglia, and Ezequiel Tovar all had 20-plus home runs this season. The last time that happened, again, going back to our trends of, playoff teams for the Rockies, was in 2019 with Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, Ryan McMahon, and Ian Desmond. I want to make the comparison to that team because I had talked about it earlier when we were talking about the Rockies being a team that strikes out a lot this season. That's going to happen when you've got young guys. All of those guys that I just listed are sub 30 in their early 20s, Ryan McMahon being, I believe, the oldest out of that bunch. But, Ezequiel Tovar only 22 years old. Michael Toglia, obviously very young. Brenton Doyle, very young. Guys who are on the very beginning slope of their career. Now, I think we're at a point where we can say, you take a look at this season, one of the worst seasons in Rockies franchise history, as you just saw. You make some adjustments going into the offseason. You know that this team has power. That part has already been decided, and you need pop to be able to compete as a postseason team, especially when you're playing at Coors Field. You make some adjustments to get your on-base percentage up, to get your average up, to get your swing rate and strikeout rate down, which we did see Tovar make some adjustments the second half of the season. He did have the most strikeouts on the team this year, but that got better in the second half. I do think that this team, this front half of that lineup, this starting lineup for the Rockies, has what it takes if they make the right changes to be a postseason team. They just have to have that complete package. Offensively, I'll say. We'll talk about pitching here in a little bit, but offensively at least. And you can see the comparisons between that 2018, 2019 team. And now we only have one guy that's left on that team. Ryan McMahon is the only guy who's left from that lineup. So let's take a quick little break here and recognize some of our sponsors as we get things sorted out here before we start talking about more of the positive stuff, because we do have more positive stuff coming back up here after this. But let's recognize one of our friends over at Game Time, because even though Rocky season is done, even though we're moving on, we're starting to look ahead towards, obviously we're in football season. Obviously we're heading into basketball. The Avs had their first preseason game officially last night. We're not going to talk about the score because it was preseason, but all that matters is that we've got great games, great sporting events all happening here in Denver. And if you want to get tickets, whether it be live sporting events, live concerts, whatever it is, you got to check out our friends over at Game Time. They've got some incredible stuff at Game Time. They've also got this cool feature called Game Time Picks, which makes getting tickets easier for you. It helps kind of filter through all of that fluff, all of that extra stuff. You don't have to sit there at the computer for an hour trying to figure out where the best seat is in the ballpark. You can look at the Game Time app. You can get 360 panoramic views so you can see what your view is going to look like. They've got the lowest price guarantee. Your purchase is also covered. They've got ticket coverage as well, so that you get the best coverage for any of your seats. They've got some great customer service as well. Really anything that you want. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, create an account and redeem code DNVR for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. We also got to give a shout out to our friends over at Empire Today, because if you are looking to get your floors renewed, replaced, however you want to call it, Empire Today has got you covered. They did our floors here in the studio, and I know how much we jack up our floors in this place. We've got things running around all the time. Yaya is constantly just putting divots in our floors. It's what we do here.
To it the other day, nothing happened.
You did. He was throwing chairs around here. It's chaos all the time. Empire Today, they came in, they gave us a look at what our floors could look like. They had their professional installers. They had professional installers coming in, and they did an incredible job. Their customer service is truly one of a kind. They took care of everything, and I have never seen better floors than what I've seen from Empire Today's floors. I know my wife and I, Marissa, we're getting ready to sell our house here within the next year or so, getting ready to get a new house, and we got to get new floors as well. And Empire Today has truly been incredible with helping just kind of get that ball rolling. We're not there yet, but we're starting to ask questions, looking at doing some measurements, looking at what the floor is going to look like in our specific home. They've got this cool thing called the Virtual Floor Designer, and really it allows us to take a picture of our current floor, and we can see what the new floor would look like, different coloring combos, that kind of thing. So it's really one of a kind. Empire Today, they've got you covered. So schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can receive $350 off discount when you use code DNVR. Restrictions apply. See empiretoday.com/DNVR for details. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of our top players of the year for the Rockies, because there were three guys in particular, offensively at least, that showed out for me, and guys that I want to highlight this year as guys that played above expectation. And we're going to start with Michael Toglia, because Michael Toglia came onto the scene, got called up from AAA on June 6th. He started out his first few games, kind of entering in as a DH. Obviously we knew he had the hitting down. We were just waiting to see what he would be doing with the first base spot. We were obviously waiting for Chris Bryant to get hurt again, obviously. And, we were trying to figure out what was going on with that. But since Michael Toglia has come on to the scene officially for the Rockies, he's had 89 starts in a row at first base. That's the most starts since Todd Helton in 2003. Galarraga holds the record with 99 straight starts, which I would see Todd Helton potentially beating next year if he stays healthy. He hit 25 home runs, had 10 stolen bases, and he did it all in less than 400 at-bats, which no first baseman in the history of baseball has done that in their season, in a season with 400 at-bats. 400 at-bats, has 25 home runs, 10 stolen bases, less than 400 at-bats. No first baseman in the history of baseball has ever done that. Michael Toglia has been a huge asset for this Rockies team. And I was talking to some of the guys in the press box before, the last home series for the Rockies, and I was saying, and I was actually asked, we actually kind of asked Bud Black about this off the record, but we were asking, hey, do we see Michael Toglia being a Gold Glove first baseman? And Bud, without hesitation, said absolutely, 100%. I think Michael Toglia has the speed, the agility, the versatility at first base. He got 10 stolen bases this year. He only got caught stealing once. So 10 for 11 in stolen bases this season. For a guy who looks like an NFL tight end, that's pretty impressive. And on top of that, we saw him improve his batting average, improve his OPS, improve his OBS going into the second half of the season. Michael Toglia was number 3 on my top 3 best players of the year, MVPs, I should say, of the year for the Rockies. Michael Toglia ranks number 3. Brenton Doyle coming in at a big high, number 2 for MVPs of this Rockies season. He showed out this year. He had 30 stolen bases, plus 30 stolen bases this year. He got his 30th of the year on Friday. That's the most by a Rocky in a single season since Charlie Blackmon had 43 stolen bases in 2015, which I forget sometimes that Charlie Blackmon had 43 stolen bases. Like, I forget that was the thing. Charlie Blackmon was very Shohei Ohtani-ish when it came to stealing bases. Got great jumps. Didn't have like a ton of speed, but he was incredible jumps. And he was lanky, and he could steal bases. So I totally forgot about that. 30 stolen bases for Brenton Doyle this season. He became the 4th Rocky in history to have 20 or more home runs and 30 or more stolen bases in a single season, joining Dante Bichette in 1996, a year before I was born, Ellis Burks, again, 1996, and Larry Walker, the year I was born, in 1997. So you're looking at some good records there, some good names to be joining for Brenton Doyle. He is on pace probably for another Gold Glove. His average outfield throw speed was 97.4 miles per hour. That's the second highest in the big leagues. Brenton Doyle was a stud this year. The dude was showing out. He was also the player of the month in the month of July. First time the Rockies had a player of the month in the month of July in years. And the guys just were playing great. Brenton Doyle was on a tear. I also think the important thing to focus on is that Brenton Doyle's average and his hitting really started to find its rhythm in the second half of the year. I mean, it tapered off a little bit towards the end, but I think if Brenton Doyle continues on the trajectory that he had after the All-Star break, he will be an All-Star next year. And I think there's a possibility the Rockies could have 3, maybe 4 All-Stars going into the midway point to next season. So Brenton Doyle, number 2 on my MVP list of the season. Number 1, my MVP of this year's Rockies team, Ezequiel Tovar. Not a huge surprise to me because Tovar did it on all different fronts. He did it defensively. He did it offensively. He was incredible. I want to circle back here before I dive deeper into Tovar. Will Carpenter makes a great point, and you're right. I actually did see this before I came into the show. Toglia is the Rockies single-season home run leader for a switch hitter. Great point there, Will, because that is something to be noted, and definitely a little bit more challenging at Coors Field, given that tall porch over there in right field sometimes. Although that's not a problem for Sam Hilliard, who hits the ball 500 feet over there in right field, but something to note as well. Going back to Tovar, though, he's on pace for his first Gold Glove at shortstop. He over the last 300 plus games. So we're looking at almost 2 seasons for Ezequiel Tovar. He's had just 14 errors over 300 games. That's incredible. That is incredible. I think he had 7 last season or 2 seasons ago, or maybe a season ago, and 6 this last season. Incredible. from a defensive standpoint for Ezequiel Tovar. He led the team with a .269 batting average, 26 home runs, 45 doubles, 764 OPS. His 26 home runs and 45 doubles were the most in the National League. The list of the guys who had Tovar's numbers at age 22, Cal Ripken Jr., A-Rod, Albert Pujols, and Miguel Cabrera. So you're in good company, Mr. Tovar, over there at shortstop in your 22-year-old season, joining some pretty big guys. But I wanted to share this comparison here, and I got a photo of this, between Tovar and Tulo. And I want you guys to see this here because I would say in age 22, this is age 22 season for both Tulo and Tovar, Tovar is looking pretty good right in there. I mean, you could see there on the screen, pretty much even if not higher for both. I mean, he's one below Tulo in hits, 177 hits for Tulo, 176 for Tovar. Home runs, 26 home runs for Tovar, 24 for Tulo. His RBIs, Tulo was higher for that because Tulo had a better offensive team around him. I mean, you're looking at his age 22 season, you had a little bit more depth there in that Rockies lineup that was on base a lot more than the Rockies lineup that we saw for Tovar here this year. That's why you have 99 RBIs for Tulo versus 78 RBIs for Tovar. Stolen bases just around the same. Batting average, again, a little higher for Troy Tulowitzki, but still pretty close there for Tovar. The issue with the batting average is that Tovar strikes out a lot. Got to get that figured out. But he did make some improvements later in the season, so that's something to keep an eye on. But Tovar is in good company right now. And I would say that Tovar's defense is pretty solid as well, up there with Tulo. Patrick Saunders made the comparison about, is Tovar the next Tulo? And I think absolutely, if he continues to play the way that he is and the Rockies hold on to him and have a good relationship with Tovar, I think he absolutely becomes the next Troy Tulowitzki, if not better, for the Colorado Rockies. Hopefully better, given that the falling out that the Rockies had with Tulo kind of towards the end of his tenure with the Rockies. So I think that there is a possibility Ezequiel Tovar could become the face of the franchise from a on-field perspective for the Rockies moving forward, kind of overtaking Ryan McMahon, who's been struggling, immensely struggling in his second half of the season. The only downside to me with Tovar is that he's just a little quiet, and that's not a bad thing. I don't care if you talk at all, if you're putting up those kind of numbers. So I want to preface that I'm not like putting this as a knock on him as a player that he's kind of shy, doesn't really talk much to the media. He's a nice guy. It's not like he's, super serious and always hating to talk to us. He just is more of a kind of take care of my business on the field type of guy, a Nikola Jokic, if you will. But the reason I've said that guys like Brenton Doyle could be more, and even Ryan McMahon could be more of the face of the franchise, is because they're a little more visible when it comes to the media. Brenton Doyle's going on MLB Network. He's coming on people's, doing interviews, one-on-one interviews with people. Like, he's a little more visible out there than Ezequiel Tovar. Tovar is kind of that quiet guy that will just take care of his business and go about his day, which is great. You love to have guys like that. Obviously, Nikola Jokic, another one of those guys for the Nuggets, which we have no complaints over whatsoever. So it's just an interesting thing to look at and to highlight. But I do think Ezequiel Tovar will continue to be the face of this franchise from a fielding standpoint and an offensive standpoint for years to come. In a moment, though, we're going to talk a little bit about what deals do the Rockies make in this offseason. This needs to be an active offseason, and the Rockies have some guys on the chopping block. Who do the Rockies potentially let go of this year? Who is safe? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a moment. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about our friends over at Raising Cane's, because it is lunchtime here at the DNVR bar. We're just up above the bar right now, and I start getting hungry this time of day. And anytime I get hungry, I gotta, of course, I get a sponsorship from our buddies at Raising Cane's, and it just makes me even hungrier, because Raising Cane's truly is the best when it comes to that perfect, most just craveable, best chicken fingers on the market. They are the one-stop shop for the best hand-battered chicken fingers anywhere in the area. They are always cooked to order, made just for you. So you got to get into a Raising Cane's to get their delicious chicken finger meals. All of it's served up fast. I don't know what it is. Their secret ingredient. I've tried to recreate, some really good hand-battered chicken fingers at home, and it just does not hit the same as Raising Cane's. So if you want some hand-battered, fresh chicken fingers, you got to go out to Raising Cane's. For cooked-to-order hand-battered chicken fingers, race into Raising Cane's. Turbocharge your chicken fingers and get them even faster by ordering online at raisingcanes.com or through their mobile app. Raising Cane's Chicken Fingers, one love. Also got to share some love with our friends over at Shady Rays. I am rocking the Shady Rays today. It is still beautiful outside. God, it doesn't even feel like fall. I'm going to be golfing later today. It's 80, is it almost 90 degrees today? I'm wearing a hoodie like it's fall, but it's actually really hot. Dude, I woke up this morning and I thought it was cold and walked outside, took the dogs on a walk and felt a little chill in the air, and then realized as I got in my car that it's toasty. So maybe kind of a bad move on my part to wear the hoodie. But either way, man, Shady Rays, whether it's 20 degrees in Denver or 100 degrees in Denver, it's always sunny. And so Shady Rays, they're the way to go. You've got a lot of great opportunities and options with Shady Rays. They've got some incredible deals and also great selection to choose from with Shady Rays. They've got style, they've got, affordability. They've got, sports sunglasses, whatever you want to get your hands on, whatever your sunglasses style is, they've got you covered there. And right now, if you use code DNVR, you can get 35% off all polarized sunglasses. I personally only get polarized sunglasses because I use them when I go fishing, and I like seeing the little fishies swimming around in the water. You don't see that with the regular sunglasses. So use code DNVR for 35% off your polarized sunglasses at Shady Rays. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars or more by over 300,000 people. Can you rate something more than 5 stars? If you could, I would rate Shady Rays more than 5 stars. They are truly incredible. All right, let's talk a little off-season and where do we go from here? Because we just took a look at where we came from, what happened this year to get us to where we are right now. So now let's look at where do we go. And I was talking to Thomas Harding, MLB.com writer, before we wrapped up our last game. I'm going to take these off, though, because I am blind. And Thomas told me that he really thinks this is going to be an active offseason for the Rockies. And God, I hope so. God, I hope so. That this offseason is just, wheeling and dealing. Bill Schmidt, I hope you're dealing from the hip, man, because if this year we don't have anything to talk about of excitement, I'm going to feel really tough about that going into next year. I do feel like we've got some pieces, though, that we can move around. And I've got some people commenting on Twitter already. They're jumping into this conversation. So let's get into it here. Who do the Rockies deal this offseason? Well, look, if I personally am the general manager of the Colorado Rockies, there are 3 main guys that I have to wheel and deal this offseason. And one of them might be a little controversial, but 3 guys that personally I am moving this offseason. Number 1 guy, Cal Quantrill. Quantrill has run his course here in Colorado. We wish the best to him. He's had some ups and downs. He's not consistent enough in this Rockies rotation. I want to get something else. We've seen a couple guys come in some trades. We saw it, Bradley Blaylock, who had some really good outings before he got sent back down to work on some things in the minor leagues. But he came in from the trade from Milwaukee with Nick Mears, and he had some really good outings for the Rockies. He was a good pickup. I would want to see Cal Quantrill get dealt for another Bradley Blaylock-esque pitcher for the Rockies. So Cal Quantrill, top of the list for me. Brendan Rodgers, number 2. Brendan's been banged up a little bit, I think he still has some upside, but I just don't know if he fits into that infield for the Rockies. And here's why. Aaron Schunk has had a great second half of the season. His defense has been incredible. I don't know if Aaron Schunk has made an error in the field. I'll have to double check that. He definitely has not been filling up the stat line error-wise, for the Rockies. Aaron Schunk, I think, is a all-around player that could be a good piece to that second base spot until we see what more, prospects come through the lineup, through the Rockies farm system. I think you got to move on from Brendan Rodgers, though. I think you've got some young guys in the rotation that could come in and fill that spot. Brendan Rodgers is number 2. Here's the controversial one. Ryan McMahon. Do you let go of Ryan McMahon this offseason? The reason I think this is controversial now in this offseason is because I actually think you should have gotten rid of, it sounds really bad, but I think you should have moved on from Ryan McMahon at the trade deadline. I think the Rockies should have gotten some value out of him coming off of that All-Star break. He was doing really well. We all love Ryan. I don't want to move Ryan McMahon, and he is a lockdown third baseman, but you do have some really good minor league infielders, and infielders have never been an issue for the Rockies, and I wouldn't expect them to continue to be an issue for the Rockies. I just am worried that McMahon's value is going to start taking some hits over the next couple seasons. We saw him fall off tremendously in the second half of the year. I think the Rockies can still get some good value out of Ryan McMahon. I could see them. I don't think they will, but I personally would move on from Ryan McMahon. Now, I do think there is some value in keeping him on this team because you don't want to completely go away from all of your veterans. And I give Ryan McMahon the veteran status because he's been with this team for a handful of years. Now that you no longer have Charlie Blackmon, you've got to be careful about just clearing house. So I'm not saying that I think the Rockies will leave Ryan McMahon. I'm just saying if it was me, I would have moved away from Ryan McMahon. I would move away from Ryan McMahon this offseason. Who do I think is safe in this offseason? Unfortunately, I'm going to have to throw this out there. I think Nolan Jones isn't going anywhere. And the reason I say unfortunately, because I want to see Nolan Jones, play well here in Denver. He played obviously great in his rookie season. His value's gone. You've only got one good year out of Nolan Jones. He came back in his second year, and it was kind of the case of the phantom rookie season. Now we have no idea what we're going to get out of Nolan Jones this next year, and teams are going to see the exact same thing. I don't see a market in which Nolan Jones can go anywhere. So hopefully Nolan Jones gets back to where he was his freshman year with the Rockies and can be an incredible asset to the outfield. But I think he's going to be safe this offseason because I don't think there's anywhere to put him in another team. Brenton Doyle, obviously going to be safe. He's the future of your franchise. Ezekiel Tovar, same thing. Kyle Freeland, I also think safe. Not a lot of value going somewhere else. He's another veteran I think will be kept in this lineup. Here's the kicker. Chris Bryant is safe. And I don't say that with a lot of... I know. Sorry, I know, for all the fans here. I don't say that with a lot of happiness because I wish there was a world in which we could get something for Chris Bryant, but we can't. He costs too much money, all of it guaranteed. No team's going to want to take over. The Rockies aren't going to swallow their pride and pay another team to take him off our roster like the Broncos did with Russell Wilson. Chris Bryant, there is a small window in which he becomes a Rockies asset, but he will be a guy on this team for the years to come. Who is up in the air? Who could the Rockies trade? Not saying they will. Who could the Rockies move? This is so dumb of me, and I'm now realizing this. Was I drunk when I wrote my notes here? I wrote Michael Toglia. That's not true. I'm going to argue with myself here. My notes, first person on my notes of who's up in the air to be traded this offseason was Michael Toglia. What the hell, Christian? That's stupid. No, Michael Toglia is your future first baseman. Michael Toglia is safe. I'm going to add him to the safe list. I think I might have meant to switch him. Maybe I was a little tired last night when I made those notes. Jacob Stallings could be up in the air this year. Senzatella could be up in the air this next season. I don't know if you can get anything for him I don't know if there's a market for him because he's coming back from injury. And Will says in the Twitter chat that Marquez, question mark. Marquez kind of is in that same boat for me. He might be on the downward slope of his career, but pitchers are different where I think you could have teams that just need like a guy who can come in and maybe get you, a start or two, and see if they're going to be a guy that can maybe have a little bit of life left in their off speed or fastballs to finish out their year. Those are guys that I could see being possibly, up in the air this year. Jeff Criswell, same thing. Criswell has had some high moments where you've said, okay, that was pretty good for the Rockies. He's also had some struggles. So I would say Criswell, another guy that's in that kind of up in the air. Is he going to be back? Is he not? We'll see on him. The last guy on the chopping block possibly for this offseason, Bud Black. Bud Black might be a guy that we do not see coming back for the Rockies next year. And on Friday, I'm going to do an entire show dedicated to will Bud Black be the future Rockies manager? And to be completely honest with you guys here, I'm going to give you some inside information. I have it on good authority that the Rockies will actually have made a decision by this weekend on whether or not they are extending Bud Black. So Friday's show is going to be about Bud Black, whether it is a definitive show on here is what the Rockies are doing, or a speculative show on will the Rockies, extend or suspend Bud Black's contract. So that is the last guy that I'm going to throw out there on the chopping block. There's plenty of other guys on this roster. You guys can share with me your thoughts on Twitter at CJJ Saez if you have any other ideas or insight or opinions on who you think should or should not be included in this Rockies roster moving forward, whether it be from a trade standpoint, from a they need more minor leagues minutes standpoint. All of that is going to be up in the air. So follow us on Twitter on the Twitter at DNVR_Rockies. Also myself at CJJ Saez. Got a couple more things to wrap up the show here, though. I want to make one last point about an interesting aspect of this season as we wrap up the review. The Rockies had 12 players make their MLB debut this year, matching a franchise record. They also had 12 players aged 24 or younger appear in a game this season, tied for the second most in franchise history. That tied the 2012 club. They also had a total of 198 appearances by a rookie pitcher. That's the third most in a single season in franchise history. So that all goes to show that this was a young year, a young season for the team. A lot of things, we talked about how bad this team was, all the negative records that they set. We have to keep in mind, though, that this is a very young team that is just now starting to find its flight feathers, hopefully. And hopefully, this can lead us to some success in the coming years. So that brings up the question, what are my goals and expectations for next year to wrap up the show? What's the mark where I say if you go anywhere below this, I'm disappointed? And Rockies fans should be disappointed. Now, I don't want to get too lofty here and say the Rockies are going to make the playoffs, but I do want to be realistic in saying they need to get better, because you are making moves and setting your deadline for the postseason at 2026. So they have to be getting better and significantly better. And I think there's a world in which that happens. And I outlined that earlier in the show. But what is the benchmark? For me, you got to be 500. The Rockies need to be 500 or better, or at least right on that. No, shut up. I'm not going to say that. They need to be 500. Otherwise, for me, that is a losing season. Also physically, but just even emotionally. You've got to be able to get over 500 if you want to stay on track to get to the 2026 postseason. I outlined how I think the Rockies can do that. I think their young core, especially their top 5 hitters, if they can have good, healthy seasons, I think they can accomplish that. But you've got to be a San Francisco Giants next year. You don't need to make the playoffs, but you've got to have meaningful baseball into the month of at least August into September and be a 500 team. That is my mark on if this will be a successful offseason and or going into next year. Real quickly, wrap up this show Wild card update, because it was chaos the last couple days. Tigers beat Houston. Orioles lost to the Royals. Mets beat the Brewers. And the Padres beat the Braves. My big takeaway from those 4 games, 3 out of those 4 games were decided on pitching. Tariq Skubal for the Tigers went 6 innings pitched, 4 hits, no earned runs. Cole Reagans for the Royals, 6 innings pitched, 4 hits, no earned runs. Michael King with the Padres, 7 innings pitched, 5 hits, no earned runs. You need to have good pitching to be a good postseason team. The Wild Card Series is proving that to us. Can the Rockies do that? And can their pitching get to where they need them to be next year? That is what we are going to figure out in this offseason. It is going to be a wild ride. We are so glad that you guys are hanging out with us. And that is going to do it for our show here on the DNVR Rockies podcast. As I said, look ahead till Friday. Come hang out with us 12:15 on Friday. We're going to be talking all things Bud Black. That's going to be coming up. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter at DNVR_Rockies, myself at CJJ Saez. Thank you to our awesome producers, Yaya and company. We are crushing it here in the studio. We'll see you guys next time. This has been the DNVR Rockies podcast brought to you by Bet365. We'll see you guys on Friday.
We all silly like the mayor.